This episode gets a little gruesome. Beware. Aquilo. Season 8. Chapter 14. The Grieving Reigns. Like most people, I've been called all sorts of things throughout my life. My brother Eric has called me every name fashionable when we were kids, from gross to annoying by way of boring. Few are the insults he hasn't hurled in my direction as we were growing up. That all died down as we got closer to adulthood, and whatever remaining invectives lingering are mostly spoken in jest. Cruel jokes maturing into playful jabs, losing their sting in exchange for more subtle flavors and textures. Annabelle once compared it to the aging of whiskey in barrels. My parents were a little more diplomatic in their name-calling, usually relying on lazy as a harsh means to motivate me to do chores. Though, if I have to choose between being called a sloth or mowing the lawn, I'll take the verbal assault any day. I think my dad might have called me stupid once or twice, but that earned him Mom's anger. I doubt he ever meant it either. Pig-headed was a favorite of mine while at school. Oh, I took pride in that one. I like to picture myself as a pit bull with jaws of steel that refused to let go. They said stubborn, and I heard strong. I had to come to terms with the difference on my own. Then there was the period of time I dated Trevor. His insults were more subtle. He'd call me controlling or paranoid, anything to add to the mounting insecurities about our relationship. Eventually, someone called me something that stood out. Most attacks on my character lacked the edge of truth necessary to cut the skin. Sure, they'd irritate, sometimes bruise, but never enough to leave a mark on my personality. This was like a butcher's knife, large and keen. It cut down to the bone. Single-minded. Spoken by a man who came so very close to ruining my life, Chef Frederick Gagnon. It was one of the rare times his sharp tongue did worse than anger me. Far worse. It made me think. Single-minded? What? Look at the width and breadth of my skills. I cook, I chop, I bake, I even sculpt, and to a certain degree draw. I'm good at math, and I can convert units in my head without effort. For someone who's never studied it, my grasp of chemistry is shockingly advanced, and I have more knowledge of biology and anatomy than the average person. Some would call me polymath, others versatile. I'm a jack of all trades, master of a few. Except that's not exactly true. In the end, despite all the hats I know how to wear, I serve only one true master. I make food. Delicious and beautiful, I'm an artist of the kitchen, and as long as I can trace a line between a skill and that role, I will find some way to learn. Beautiful cakes and gingerbread houses require careful planning, so I know how to sketch and sculpt. Preparing meat and keeping a sourdough culture alive and thriving demand an understanding of biology, chemistry, and anatomy. If there was a recipe that relied on radioactivity to accomplish, I'd become a nuclear physicist. In that sense, I am single-minded, but I make it work for me. Detective Julien Lamour isn't that different. He, too, is single-minded in a way that makes him a more rounded individual. His religion isn't food as it is for me. Even while he was a pilvist, I have a sense that it was never about the cloud or the nature goddess held within. Instead, Julien Lamour is a man who worships at the altar of truth, a truth that Aquilo has worked extra hard to keep from him. He could have retired ages ago, moving out of town, found a quiet place to spend his final days. Instead, he persists as one of two detectives doing the rounds in the tiny village, unsatisfied with what he knows so far. It's like trying to watch a subatomic particle, he's explaining. The very act of observing it changes the particle's properties, so you're no longer seeing what you were trying to see. The afternoon is stretching towards its inevitable demise as we turn off Rue Principale. We left Cindy in Annabelle and Eric's care at the cafe. Stefan has instructions to keep their tab aside for me to take care of. It's against protocol and certainly not good business to give out free food and drinks, but he barely grit his teeth at my request. I don't get it, I say, shaking my head. A few people are getting off work early, scrambling to stay out of the timid rain. Most don't notice, but those that do give us a curious look. What is Miriam Dufour doing in Detective Lamore's car? How unusual, they must think. Either of us alone would not have had an impact, but being together turns heads. I can't investigate the things I want, Lamore explains. Aquilo is full of mysteries that I've yet to elucidate. You should see my desk. Decades of unsolved crimes and incidents without reason. If I'd ever wanted to leave this village, my track record wouldn't paint a pretty picture of my performance. Despite all that, Mayor Lagacé never once petitioned to have me removed, transferred, or demoted. I've never even been refused a raise, which just adds to the mystery, don't you think? But I'm that observer I was talking about. I can't go into a situation without altering its nature. It's like being parent to a bunch of teenagers. The moment I enter the room, they immediately change the subject. And don't think I haven't noticed Aaron and Veronique, and even Marie Belle, conspiring to keep me in the dark. And Doris. We've arrived at our destination. The house of Cotton Gallagher isn't much to look at. Not that it's horrible, but rather that it's the kind of bungalow that tends to vanish amongst its peers. Aquilo lacks a proper suburb, and houses like this one are rare, yet still bland enough to disappear from sight. The drab steel-gray clouds and annoying drizzle do nothing to make the home seem more pleasant. Doris, I ask, curious but suspecting the answer. Ever since I moved to Aquilo, your great-grandaunt has been the most elusive of them all, always assuring me that whatever deep mystery I was trying to solve would take care of itself. And for the most part, they did, leaving yet another cold case to gather dust in my file cabinet. It must have been frustrating for him, always being kept on the periphery of the strange happenings he was tasked to investigate, an entire conspiracy keeping him out. Lamore's pace is brisk as he walks up to the yellow tape in front of the door. He doesn't bother opening the small umbrella that he got from the car, worried instead about fishing a set of keys from his pocket. They're Cotton's keys, of course, and he uses them to open the front door. But Cotton Gallagher isn't in town. Everyone in Aquilo knows that he goes fishing up north in the lakes. Legend has it that sometimes he even brings something back. While he's gone, he has his niece Michelle rent out the house to tourists. She does maintenance, cleans, and even cooks breakfast if the guests request it. Michelle's been told to stay away from her uncle's house today. Coroner's on his way from Saint-Jean to pick up the body, Lamore explains. I'm going to have a hell of a time explaining this one. Are you sure you want to do this? It was my idea, after all, to come here and to see for myself the horror Cindy had discovered. I've seen worse, haven't I? I've worked at a butcher's, after all, and this won't be the first dead body I've seen. How much more gruesome could this be? Well, for starters, I never dated any of the pigs and cows we had to cut apart. I didn't share an apartment with Clara Payne and the other victims of the hunger demon. I'm fine. The house isn't so big that it takes us long to get to the bathroom. Not that it would have been difficult to find, what with the smell of blood, urine, and feces filling the air. Remember, the detective starts before I interrupt. Don't touch anything. I know. It's like Cindy described it, and yet completely different. The blood is so much more red than I expected, and there's too much of it. Perhaps it's the cold fluorescent light or the baby blue porcelain tub and tiles, but the crimson of Trevor's blood screams into my eyes. It looks like someone draped a thick rubber glove on the side of the bath, dripping in red liquid. It's leaving a stain on the white rug on the floor. Leaning in closer, I swallow my breath. It's not a glove, of course. Gloves don't wear rings, and this one is wearing a pinky ring of braided silver, just like Trevor's. The empty fingers are connected to a hollowed-out hand and a wrist that disappears into an opaque pool of blood. A few strands of hair float near the surface at the head of the tub. Somewhere in there, the remains of Trevor are submerged. So, Lamore asks, crouching down to my level, looking at the same gruesome spectacle I am. We had a deal. I take you to see the remains of your ex, but you have to tell me everything else you know. It's outlandish, I warn, still transfixed by the display. How is there so much blood? As outlandish as this? Lamore pulls out a cheap plastic pen and raises Trevor's hand, demonstrating the lack of bones, muscles, and sinew under the skin. Not a single cut or laceration. At least, not in the limbs I've been able to look at without pulling the body out of the tub. He's right. He'll have a hell of a time explaining this to a coroner. The Pilvists, I say, my voice weaker than intended, or whatever they've become. You sent me to that house last night, and they had Diane Sarajo's skeleton there, and Phyllis Baker, and... I hesitate. He wants to know. He hungers for it so much that he once joined the cloud-worshipping cult. What's the worst that could happen? Detective Lamore doesn't believe me? I continue the charade Doris and everyone else in town played for him? And demons, I say, like a confession. 2 demons. One of the things I love about having moved to Aquilo, aside from the cafe, of course, is Doris's apartment. Obviously, a fully paid and furnished lodging is an unparalleled blessing, especially in this economy, but there's more to it than that. After 3 years living there, I've barely replaced but a few items and haven't touched the furniture. The reason is simple. I love antiquities. If not, I would have tossed the cantankerous coffee machine in the garbage a long time ago and would have started the process of renovating the apartment to more modern tastes. I'm no Luddite, but I have an appreciation for older things, forgotten techniques, and traditional recipes. There is a notable exception to that. Phones. Detective Lamore is guiding me out of the Gallagher house, his knobby hand pushing on my upper back, making sure I follow his pace. We're done here, he's decided, but I can feel the questions building up inside him. Phyllis Baker? Demons? What nonsense am I speaking? Just as his mouth starts to move, curiosity ready to spill from him as we spill from the front door, something stirs in my back pocket. Not the short pulse of a text message or notification, but the long, drawn-out buzz of a phone call. It takes me a moment to fish out my phone and understand what's going on. What can possibly require a phone call when texting works just as well? An emergency, that's what. Eric, I answer, having seen his name on the device's screen. What's wrong? They're gone, he says in a tone similar to that time he called about Dad getting in a car crash. At the end of the day, our father had nothing worse than broken glasses and an abrasion to his left arm, but the car was a complete loss and we had a bit of a scare. This sounds just about as serious. I want to ask who the hell he's talking about, but I already know. Annabelle and Cindy, the 2 people I wanted him to keep an eye on. Eric, you had one job. Fear and panic collapsing into a mess of anger. Even as I'm losing control, I can see all the threads being pulled apart. It's not just Eric having failed in what should have been an easy task, but the culmination of everything piling on. When you're making a multi-tiered cake, you have to put in supports. Usually thick plastic straws and occasionally pieces of cardboard, offering extra stability and structure to the sponge. Otherwise, the weight of the other cakes, the cumulative buttercream, candied fruits, and other decorations will crush the bottom layers. I don't like using non-food items in my cake, but this is where a compromise has to be reached. As my knees buckle from underneath me, I realize that I'm that bottom layer. Lamore tries his best to avoid my falling to the ground, lowering me to the floor of the front porch instead. Sitting in a rain puddle, I watch my whole confection fall apart. The corpse of my ex-boyfriend should have been the layer of frosting that tore everything down, but instead, it's the potential danger to my friend. And Cindy, I suppose.
What was I supposed to do?
Eric asks, his voice struggling to get through to me.
I couldn't exactly hold them by force. They went to the back. Annabelle said it was to get some fresh air, but when I checked on them after a minute, they were gone.
Two traumatized, grieving women, desperate for solutions and answers. Where could they possibly have gone? Back to church seems unlikely. There's a chance they might have sought out Ophelia and Gulliver, which would make my job easier. Who else would Annabelle seek out for comfort and aid? Olivia Figg? Helen Edna, notary public?
I'm going to look for them.
Eric breaks through my thoughts.
I think they might have gone back to the cemetery.
As glad as I am to hear Eric take initiative and offer up a possible solution, something seems off. Of all possible destinations for the girls, the cemetery didn't even make my mental list. Wait, I say before he has a chance to hang up. The cemetery? Why? A gust of wind blows a spray of rain into my face. The cold water helps me retain focus and think, listening carefully to what my brother says next.
When I saw they were missing from the alley,
He explains.
I noticed the shovel, the one we used to dig up that grave. It was gone. I figured they're going back for something.
Trees sway on the Gallagher's front lawn, heavy with rainfall and pushed around by the weather. They remind me of a cold night 2 days ago. Stay at the cafe, I insist, struggling to pull myself up to my feet again. They're not going to the cemetery.
Tell me where they've gone.
No, I say, leaving no room for argument. Stay at the cafe until I'm back. Last thing I need is more people to round up. The last thing I hear from him is the intake of breath as he's about to argue again, but I hang up the call before giving him the chance. This was a mistake. A mistake I should have seen coming. I thought Annabelle and Cindy could commiserate and give each other support while I went to see for myself what had befallen Trevor. In any other scenario, Annabelle would have been the perfect shoulder to cry on. She has a knack for this kind of thing. A patient ear and a talent for knowing just when to talk and when to shut up. Except Annabelle has a stake in this, and to assume that she, of all my friends, would just sit still while I went off with detectives? Stupid. Where to? Lamore asks, cleaning his glasses with his cardigan as he looks over Gallagher's driveway. I'm sorry? I'm not good at many things, he explains, putting the spectacles back on his nose. But I can read a situation better than most. You're obviously not going back to your cafe, and you sound like you're in a hurry. And with what happened to your friend in there, I don't think it's very safe for you to wander around alone in the rain. So, where to? I look him over, appraising the old man anew. While laughable, I can imagine Detective Wilson in a fight. He's younger and keeps himself in relatively good shape. Lamore is another story. He's old and frail, his movements careful and calculated, but slow. He's a thoughtful, attentive man, not an action hero. However, he is one other thing. Capable. And maybe that's what I need right now. You know where Pickering's farm is? The drive is an interesting one. It dawns on me as we go through the streets of Aquillow that I've never driven to Farmer Pickering's home. We always walk through his fields, arriving from the back of the farm between the garage and barn. As we make our way south, digging deep into the U.S. side of the village, I explain what little I know to Detective Lamore. To his credit, he doesn't mock my tale of demons and cultists and vanishing remains. He also doesn't give any sign that he believes me either, but I get the feeling that my words are being poured into an open mind and not wasted. The rain has died down some during our drive, but the damage is done. Pickering's front yard is a collection of puddles and water-filled tracks. I don't know if I can judge the man's skill for growing and harvesting crops, but landscaping is certainly not his field of expertise. Getting out of the detective's modest sedan, we both take stock of the farmhouse. I can't tell what Lamore's looking for, but I'm hoping to perhaps see the signs that Annabelle and Cindy have been through here, or better yet, are sitting at Pickering's table.
So,
He growls as he opens the front door.
you do know how to ring a doorbell.
He makes no sign of moving aside or inviting us out of the rain. Instead, his scrutiny is cemented on the detective. I doubt these men have never met before, but knowing Pickering's reclusive nature and Lamore's vocation, I somehow doubt they're good friends.
What's this about, Miriam?
The farmer asks, not quite belligerent, but without a doubt at the end of his rope with me. Squaring my shoulders, I grind my jaw for a moment before gathering the wits to look the intimidating man in the eye. It's tempting to give up and just go about this on my own. Maybe Lamore would follow, but at least I'd avoid the uncomfortable conversation.
I need your dogs,
I repeat. Not asking, I hope that I'll get a more positive result, but the tensing in Pickering's neck muscles tells me all I need to know before he even opens his mouth. Again, his gaze moves over to the detective, recognizing him for the changed variable he is.
Still looking for the mayor?
Pickering says, ready to slam the door in our face.
He's got dogs. Use them.
Against my better judgment, I step forward, doing the old traveling salesman trick of putting my foot in the door. I'm pretty sure Pickering could break every single one of my toes with one good swing of the hinges, but that's a gamble I'm willing to take.
I'm not looking for the mayor,
I say, the urgency in my voice betraying my own growing panic.
Annabelle went into the woods alone to look for her mother. She's the one I'm worried about.
Mirroring the farmer's mood, the rain grows in anger and intensity. Curtains of water fall from the sky, growling as they hit the asphalt and packed soil. The wind shows its teeth, much the same way Pickering does as he ponders my request anew. I pull my foot back from the threshold, ready to concede should he decide to stand firm on his decision, but there's something about the unique strain on his face that tells me otherwise. Whatever it is that draws a line between Veronique Lagacé and her daughter is enough to tip this important balance. Pickering doesn't answer. Instead, he puts 2 fingers, his thumb and index, between his teeth and blows. The ear-splitting whistle startles me for a moment, and I'm not sure what it implies. That is, until I hear the sound of skittering paws on hardwood floors. The forest has seldom looked more forbidding. Despite the diffuse sunlight finding its way through the rain clouds, it gives off a hostile aura. While there may be no fence or barrier that delineates the end of our world and the beginning of the woods, there's a line carved into the soil. It's drawn of the accumulated memories of the things I've seen and suffered under this blanket of dark leaves. Even flanked by 2 men, one built like the farm equipment he uses and maintains, and the other armed, I feel no safety walking between the trees. Darling, the aggressive and muscular Great Dane, circles to and from us, sniffing at the air for threats and prey, but does nothing to push away the fear. Takes a moment to put it together, but it eventually comes to me. No amount of personal security, armor, weapons, or defenses could push away this dread that crawls over my skin like so many raindrops. This panic, coursing through my body like some low-voltage current, isn't for me. It's for my friend, for the mayor, even for Ophelia and Cindy. Looking at my companions, I see no firm on which to find footing. Pickering looks about as comfortable as a turkey on Thanksgiving, eyes shifting and arms flexing, as if ready to fight the very trees that surround us. For his part, Lamore seems nervous. He's outside of his territory, outside of his field of expertise, and investigating something not based on the facts and realities he's been used to. Uncharacteristic of him, his hand has been resting on his sidearm since we first stepped between the trees. Only Dragon looks like he's focused on the task at hand, walking a dozen paces ahead, nose to the undergrowth, forging a path for us to follow.
Are you sure he wouldn't have an easier time if I got something of Annabelle's for him to smell?
I ask Pickering, startling him.
He knows the scent,
the farmer assures, his tone uninviting to further questions. I don't know the first thing about bloodhounds and how they track, and it seems unlikely that Dragon can remember a specific smell like Annabelle's without some sort of reminder, but I have to admit that the dog looks like he knows what he's doing. I remember the first few times I came to this forest. I loved it here. Beautiful nature that served as an escape from the village and the scarier things that skulk in Aquilow's shadow. Every visit since has been increasingly darker, nature building ever sturdier walls to keep me out.
Do you expect we'll stumble on Phyllis Baker and those so-called demons, Miriam?
Lemore's the one to ask, his voice as level as always despite his body language. Pickering raises an eyebrow but doesn't inquire for more details, listening first to how I answer.
I hope not,
I explain, trying to address both men at once.
This cult, this Aquilow Occult Enthusiasts Club, seems to be moving their meetings from one place to another. Anthony Gillard Memorial Arena,
Lemore confirms.
Then the old house where the Pilvists used to congregate. I never got the invitation for a clearing in the woods, though. I suppose there's only so much they want local law enforcement to be aware of.
Richard David Pickering grunts, a sound that lives somewhere between laughter and growl. He scratches Darling between the ears as she makes her round back to him.
Anthony Gillard is full of ghosts,
he says, counting the locations on thick fingers.
The Black Manor is a house full of tragedy, and the woods, well, the woods don't even belong to us, do they?
The cracking of twigs and squishing of mud takes on a more ominous tone at Pickering's words. Lemore gives me a curious sideways glance, hoping for an explanation. I'm afraid he won't be getting it, though. I'm entangled in my own thoughts. Why do these new worshippers move from location to location? And why those specific places? But even these questions won't find their answer, for we have arrived at our destination. The clearing again. When will I stop having to come here, and when will the forest no longer guide me to this location? Damn thing hasn't changed since last we were here. Apart from the rain falling freely through the opening in the canopy, every tree and stone remains the same. Of course, the blood has been partially washed away, and what's still there has dried into a burgundy stain. Heavy drops of water that thud steadily on the leaves above splash in violent bursts over the stone, nature attempting to clean away our passing. The moist, peaty smell of the undergrowth permeates the air, masking any remaining hint of the iron that was so obvious last I was here. Still, memory manages to overcome my senses, forcing the fragrance to the forefront of my mind.
Annabelle!
I scream, my voice loud but struggling to compete with the heavy rainfall. I hear no answer but the rustling of heavy branches caught in a gust of wind. Lemore, victim of his vocation, doesn't hesitate long to walk into the clearing. Each of his steps is only taken after a quick inspection of the ground, worried about disturbing evidence or missing an important clue. Meanwhile, Pickering is watching over the whole of the clearing, either oblivious or uncaring about the fine details. To his credit, he seems to remain on mission. Thick fingers shield his eyes as he surveys the edges of the woods, occasionally tossing a glance at his dogs to make sure they're still close. I'm about to give up myself and join the detective in his inspection of the bloodied stone. Surely he must have questions on his mind, especially in light of what we found. What we found. Every muscle in my body seems to seize up whenever I stop distancing myself from what we found. Trevor's body, my ex-boyfriend, a man I once loved, reduced to a pile of skin and bones floating in a pool of blood. The images flood back whenever I allow them even the faintest of grip into my psyche. Let's not mince words. I hated Trevor towards the end, but nowhere near enough to wish this upon him.
There,
Pickering says, his steady voice pulling me back from the edge of my own precipice.
What is that foolish girl doing?
I see what he sees, a shock of blue hair weaving through the trees opposite us. Unlike the farmer, though, I already know what Annabelle is about. I've known since the moment Eric mentioned the missing shovel.
Annabelle!
I scream again. Unlike Lamore, I make no effort to preserve the scene or even show respect to this place the Fae holds so sacred. Instead, I trudge, clumsy and awkward, through the tall grass and mud. Puddles of wet soil suck at my shoes, intent on removing them, and I feel cold water seep into my sneakers with every step. Annabelle raises her head for a moment, but doesn't bother acknowledging any of us. Did she even hear me? Or did something else deeper in the forest catch her attention? Regardless, she goes on with her task, working the shovel into the ground. A pale shadow of pink emerges from the trees, holding a familiar umbrella to shield itself from the increasingly aggressive rain. It's the umbrella I keep under the counter of the cafe, the one with the pretty green and red tartan pattern that reminds me of fall. And holding it, as I expected, is Cindy, who's doing her best to protect both herself and Annabelle from the downpour.
"What are you doing?"
I scream, getting close enough that I can't be ignored. The rain splattering around us has become a deluge. My clothes are sodden, sticking to my body like a second cold skin. She finally locks eyes with me for a second. She looks crestfallen, her eyes full of water that could have been from the rain, but also from her aching heart. She's obviously afraid and disappointed, worried that I'm going to try and stop her.
"Annabelle,"
I repeat, getting close enough that I could reach out and take the shovel from her. Judging by the intensity with which she's digging and the white-knuckle grip she has on that tool, that would not be a wise course of action. Not unless I want that shovel in my face.
"They said,"
she answers at long last while she keeps shoveling,
"that there was iron buried around the clearing. They said it kept them from getting in and that if we wanted their help, we should dig it up. Well, I need their help. I need answers."
Cindy watches on like a zombie. I can tell she has little idea of where she is and what's going on. Did she accompany Annabelle of her own volition, or was she dragged along?
"You don't want their help,"
I assure.
"These creatures we met, they're capricious and don't play by our rules. You can't bargain with them and expect a fair result. Please, put the shovel aside. The only thing you're digging up is trouble."
She ignores me. In fact, I think my words only serve to urge her on in her efforts. With each shovelful, Annabelle creates a longer and larger trench, shallow as it might be. She's looking for the iron the Fae warned about, digging holes that keep filling back with filthy water. Worms and twigs float up in these newly formed puddles, and the smell of wet soil overwhelms the senses.
"Annabelle,"
I now plead.
"I'm sorry. Maybe I should have focused more on your mom's disappearance. If you stop digging, we can figure out a better way to find her. We can—"
My voice dies out, swallowed not by the pouring rain, but rather by the simple glimmer of metal in the ground. Iron, they said, was buried around the clearing, keeping the Fae from their sacred place, but they never said from where the iron came, if they even knew in the first place. Annabelle falls to her knees, her hands digging deep into the muddy waters to pull out her discovery. It would be a treasure in any other circumstances, this piece of antiquity lost in the forest. As the showering rains wash off the dirt and grime, however, we can see that this precious find holds a dire message. In her hands, Annabelle holds the guard of an ornate, broken sword. It's only a piece of an otherwise shattered weapon. Like her, I recognize it. Last I saw this fragment, it was part of the whole blade, hung up at City Hall like a piece of Aquilo history. I always suspected that the mayors of Aquilo used this weapon in their sacred duty to close the Hellgate twice a year. Now the sword is broken, and there is little reason to think the same fate hasn't befallen Veronique Lagacé. Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubois and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Blue Sky, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.